maker is not willing to take it in serious consideration. Moreover, this contradiction is present also at the European level. Indeed, the difficult dialogue between the Court of Justice and the decision maker has not yet found an appropriate and shared balance. Basically, while the former, the Court of Justice, has deemed the guarantees of proportionality and precautionality applicable to the right to privacy also in time of emergency, I refer again to Digital Right Ireland, but also to another decision, Maximilian Schrenk's, the recent directive EU 2017-541, I spoke about it during a congress some days ago, on combating terrorism, goes into the opposite direction. Then, conclusively, the constituent process of the Internet is a desirable event, nevertheless far from becoming true, though this doesn't reduce but even strengthen the value of Boldrini Committee Declaration as political manifesto, and also, I can say, as an act obeying to ethical values. Thanks for your attention. I hope to respect the time.
So thank you very much, Professor De Minico. I hope all those who haven't studied law could follow the main idea, which is that a declaration of internet rights is still a political declaration. It's not a juridical instrument yet. So we will see how the internet will go into the constitutions and into the laws. And you mentioned that terrorism, in Germany we have a hate speech, and so let's say that freedom in the internet is limited, of course, to other interests of society. And the legal system has to find the right balance between freedoms that you have of opinion, of speech, but as well public order and other, let's say, basic values that you want to preserve. Thank you very much, and I think later we will discuss. And now we come to Professor Christoph Lüdtke. And I don't know whom of you owns Bitcoins. Is there anybody who has bought Bitcoins? Oh yeah, the value went up. Is it good now? And you won? Yeah? Okay, I missed it. So I'm still on my savings bank, so I didn't go into this one. But the mystery of Bitcoins and blockchain will now be developed by Professor Lüdtke. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. As probably not everyone is familiar with the mechanisms of Bitcoin, I have to introduce in 15 minutes also, I think, a bit of the mechanism, and that's what I will do first. So Bitcoin was originated in 2008 when a person or a group of people, which we don't really know, but it was known as Satoshi Nakamoto, published a paper on a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Last year when I gave this talk in Tokyo, I said it was now revealed who this person was, an Australian businessman. Actually, now it seems it was not him. There are several claims against several candidates. We don't know really who Satoshi Nakamoto is. It seems definitely he's not Japanese, that's what, but even that is not sure. Anyway, so you can read this all on Wikipedia. So a purely peer-to-peer version of an electronic cash system. That would be different from the traditional electronic payment systems like, for example, PayPal or others, because they still use a central ledger. So you need to keep information in a centralized way, and the basic ethical issue here is trust. A banking system is basically about trust, and it doesn't work without trust. And who generates this trust? That is the question. And in all traditional banking systems, or even in the traditional electronic systems, you needed some centralized entity which is trusted. In Bitcoin, this function is done in a different way. The necessary ledger is distributed among all users of the system via a peer-to-peer, so direct peer-to-peer network. Every transaction that is occurring in the Bitcoin economy is registered in a publicly distributed ledger, a blockchain, which I will also talk about in a moment. And if there's a new transaction, it is checked against the blockchain to ensure that the same bitcoins aren't spent in several ways and haven't been previously used already. And there are complicated algorithms that are run through the network to verify the signatures of each transaction before adding it to the entire blockchain. So transfers of ownership are recorded, they are time-stamped and displayed in one block of the blockchain. And in this process of mining bitcoins is a central issue here. Every new transaction is broadcast across the network by participating computers, and they're communicating to create and agree on the updates on the official log. They are creating basically trust in this way. So maybe a bit like other internet mechanisms where you generate trust via eBay users or Amazon users which agree to or evaluate some transactions or goods. The mining of bitcoins is a central issue, I said. So you started basically in this network with one block, and they are constantly mined again. I won't go into the process here in detail because it's a bit complicated. There is a total number, a theoretical number of bitcoins, a fixed upper limit, which will be reached around the year 2140. So that would mean we would not have inflation eventually, but gradual deflation. But that's something for the future, I would say. Bitcoins have value because they are useful and they are scarce. I said yesterday when there was a question about whether we would gradually abandon money, and I said no, but we will not abandon scarcity, and bitcoins to some extent artificially generate this scarcity. They are not, as you probably know, they are not backed up by anything except the variety of merchants that accept and change them to no gold standard or something. We have even several hundred ATMs worldwide now. Yeah, about the value of Bitcoin has increased much higher volatility than most common currencies, as we can see from the figures. The forecast is that it's probably going to stabilize, but that remains to be seen. And so there are win-win outcomes here to be expected. The early adopters profited from a rise in value. I would say there is still rises in value, so even there you could still profit from it if it stabilizes in the long run also. The first years were quite tumultuous, you could say. There was the collapse of a Bitcoin exchange a couple of years ago already, and there are still a lot of people reluctant to adopt Bitcoin. Bitcoin is certainly a pioneer in this field, but there are others as well. There have been hundreds of alternatives created, and with varying success, I would say. So I said the blockchain is central to the technology of Bitcoin, and as blockchain is used in more context now than Bitcoin, I would just highlight this a bit more. A blockchain in general, so this is like a generalization of the idea of Bitcoin, is a data structure that makes it possible to create a digital ledger of transactions and share it among distributed networks. There is cryptography, it is encrypted in some ways. There's a protocol that defines the rules, and so here you see what a blockchain theoretically would look like. There are blocks of data that are recorded on it, it's extremely difficult to remove or change them because the other participants in the network evaluate the chains constantly. And if they don't agree, then it will not be added to that. Many companies are also exploring private blockchains. The key element is, however, that the entire network is responsible here. I have to skip over this a bit quickly here. You can have blockchains in several contexts. As I said, for example, is digital signatures for messages, for example. For contracts, you can sign entire blocks of transaction in order to allow access to something. And you can distribute ledgers for autonomous agents, for example. I will talk about the smart contracts in a moment. So these are some possible applications. And unfortunately, I just can mention very few. This is R3CEV is a partnership consortium by Deutsche Bank and others in order to use the technology. Ujo Music is a platform for releasing music on a blockchain platform in order to allow artists to give them greater ownership over their music, for example, or other creations. So you can purchase licenses to download or stream something. So the smart contracts, this is probably an important thing for the future. Self-verifying, self-executing smart contracts that use Bitcoin or other blockchain technology. They can be easily created online, and they are constantly monitored by the other users in the network. So a lot more could be said about this, how it works. Or what I find interesting is this Everledger solution, which is a solution for detecting the authenticity of diamonds, yeah? Because every diamond has a unique signature, and this can be verified almost instantly via the blockchain technology. Yeah, there are others which the voting system could also be used in this way, and this is a project in New York for providing energy over a sort of smart grid with solar panels, and we heard about solar panels yesterday, and I think this is a very important addition, actually. Even some people that try to create a bit nation on this basis. Estonia started a cooperation. I'm not sure if Jan Tallinn is still here. Maybe he could comment on that. Now, what are the ethical, or what could be seen as the ethical advantages and disadvantages? So the decentralization certainly is, in the first instance, a possible advantage. It eliminates barriers to competition. It unleashes the power of decentral initiatives, so to speak. It can help to disseminate information quickly and allow verification of transactions much faster than in traditional contexts. The currency competition could be, or will certainly be increased. I think this is safe to say already. It might not lead to this complete denationalization of money that Hayek envisioned, but it will certainly intensify competition between different currencies. You might say this is not an advantage, but that can be debated. But certainly the government control over a currency is not always beneficial. So economists say this could be an advantage. The pseudonymity, so not complete anonymity, but pseudonymity, so using a pseudonym, is something that's double-sided or double-handed. On the one hand, it is more transparent, more anonymous than traditional payment systems. On the other hand, every transaction is recorded in the publicly viewable ledger. So everyone knows what's going on at the same time. So you have more privacy, but on the other hand, you are more exposed. What I think would definitely be an advantage is the empowerment in the microfinancial sense. They are substantially cheaper, these currencies, and quicker than traditional payment networks. They lower transaction costs. For example, in 2013, I have a figure here, the global average fee for sending money was 9%. Here it's costs usually less than 1%. Quite interesting, especially for remote regions that are previously not served by any financial institutions at all. This is related here. It provides banking for the unbanked, if you like, for those people who have not access or very limited access to traditional banking. For example, there are applications in Kenya or Afghanistan. This M-Pesa is a very interesting system to look into. However, mostly of these are still closed systems, closed system mobile payments, which are not always connected to the public blockchain, but they are very important steps toward something greater. Increasing consumer choices might be seen as an advantage, maybe some would not see that. What I think is interesting, the neutrality of the Bitcoin this is important, because it is not like there is someone else in control now. You cannot say we do not have big government, but now we have big companies. So in the case of blockchain, this is not true. This is simply a very different mechanism. So there's not one in control. The stability that remains to be seen. In Argentina, for example, Bitcoin has been adopted to some extent as a response to the high inflation rate and the instability. And so there it has actually provided some of the features that traditional currency is to provide, but did not in that case. And yeah. So certainly there are also ethical problems associated with this, and this is the last thing that I will go into, because I will not. I have to highlight also that there are possible problems associated with it. So one thing that frequently comes up are security problems, and of course you need to have up-to-date equipment to protect the users. So if they are not encrypted, they might be stolen, and so then the digital data is gone. And at least some years ago, some prominent Bitcoin exchanges have struggled with security issues. It is not clear whether this one case was due to internal problems or due to hacker attacks from outside. Not clear. So, but you have to protect it by technology, certainly. I mean, you might lose your wallet as well, so then it is gone. These security problems also, I mean, depend on energy supply. If you have no energy at all, then you have a problem with cryptocurrencies. Power shortages could endanger them. So, yeah, better be careful with the energy. Privacy issues. As I said before, every transaction is recorded, the time, the amount, and other information. So that is publicly viewable. And if you identify a person's public key, then you can easily look up all the transactions. And so you can. It is rather easy, I would say, to tie real-world identities to pseudonymous Bitcoin addresses. It could lead to less privacy for the ordinary consumer. The centralization issue, the problem, that, as I say, I put a question mark here because that is really, it's true, it can be used, for example, to sell illegal products, as ordinary money can be used in the same way to sell drugs. Money laundering problems, yes, there are some sites on the deep web. There's a black market that allows people to sell forged identity documents, drugs, or so illicit drugs. So it seems that it constitutes only a tiny part of the Bitcoin economy, but I mean, this is also in the real world, so it's not just there. Financing terrorism, illegal goods, but it's the same we have with ordinary money. This is a website, just to show you, apparently, what the Silk Road, this which sells illegal goods, apparently looks like. Yeah. There might be other problems with maybe pollution, because energy consumption might intensify. There are economic problems might be tied to volatility. Technology must be accessible, available, and they might say in general, I think the Bitcoin and blockchain technology holds a big number of chances for the world and especially for the development of many regions, but also for the developed regions as well, to facilitate and to make things more available and accessible. And of course, many of these problems still need to be solved, but I think there are some promising sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Lütke, opening even my eyes to a new world. Since I haven't purchased Bitcoins like you and others, it's amazing what is possible. And it is, nevertheless, we don't come too late, because the last Bitcoin was 2,140, so there's still chances to come into the system. And I will check whether the diamonds of my wife are true or fraud. So that is a lesson I learned this morning. Anyway, disruptive technology, a denationalization of currencies. Can you imagine that? You have a global currency. This is amazing. And since I just published a book about the World Parliament, World Parliament needs a world currency, so that joins quite easily. Yeah, I want to switch the program and give the floor to Professor Dr. Knut Blind, Technische Universität Berlin. Ethical aspects of ICT patents, another most interesting issue that we get to know more by now. And if you find your slot in the computer, we will start your expose.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. Also, thank you for the flexibility, not only of today, but in general, in inviting me. And unfortunately, I'm a little bit packed this week. Had a kind of workshop on standardization patents yesterday in Berlin, and I have a workshop on standardization in the afternoon. Therefore, I have to heading back. In contrast to the previous, because I'm talking a little bit work in progress. In the context of a European project on ICT patents, and I will report what we have done so far, reviewing the literature and interviewing some experts. The project aims to check what are the possible challenges, and also what are improvements related to the current framework for ICT patents to promote responsible innovation. This is in the context of a program, Responsible Research and Innovation, which has been promoted by the European Commission. There are 5 dimensions regarding responsible research and innovation. It's about gender aspects, open access to scientific results, also formal education, and the ethics. Yeah? And we are focusing a little bit on the ethics. And what we did first was to review the literature, and we didn't find too much. There are some publications and about the ethical aspects of patents per se. This is from ETICO. ETICO is the Norwegian National Research Ethics Committee, and they came up with some aspects like unfair monopoly of humankind's collective heritage, especially a patent on genes, fragmentation of the IPRs, patent thickets, for example, patent wars, excluding others from really important knowledge, a reduction of access to medicine and essential benefits for especially poor people, unfairness, especially for new and smaller market players, especially in the context of litigation. Then prevention of information being disclosed to the contributors, especially here in this context, participants of clinical trials, and maybe also the issue of biopiracy. That means taking resources from especially poor countries without really giving their fair share. This is not so much focusing on ICT. In general, this committee said, okay, there are maybe two major aspects within this public availability dimension and the legitimate ownership dimension. The public availability dimension refers to whether a patent will prevent potential users from benefiting out of the invention. And the other thing is the ownership, whether the inventor deserves really this exclusive ownership's rights to inventions. And here it's criticized, it depends on the invention's origins. And some argue, okay, this invention is kind of a part of the humankind's collective heritage. This is one source. What we then did also to search a little bit the literature broader, focusing on ICT, and what we found is a strong focus on software patents and patenting software. This is the major focus. Here, some claim, okay, software patents might be misused and also especially kind of providing limited access. Then there were some other critique that there's an inconsistency regarding software. That means we have a different regime in Europe compared to the US, which is not very helpful. But overall, there is not much about that. That means the existing literature is quite limited. And I close the review of the literature with some insights from a report by the EPO published 10 years ago on the scenarios of the future, and here there are raised some ethical questions. The one question is the patent system really offering the business sufficient protection in a more fierce competitive environment? Then also, does the patent system allow new businesses entering the markets? Is it serving the world interest in general? And how can maybe especially the demand from society benefiting more from the ICT and the IP system? And whether the patent system is really reflecting ethical and societal and moral dilemmas adequately. Are there limits to patentability? And how maybe can unethical behavior be prevented in the patent system? These were questions raised 2007, and they were not really answered. Some more recent activities of the European Commission, there is regarding ethics on ICT in general, because we had not much on ethics in ICT patents found. Therefore, we looked a little bit broader, and there's a European group on ethics in science and technologies, which also covered the issue of ethics of ICT technologies. There's another group called ETICA, that stands for Ethical Issues of Emerging ICT Applications. They touched that, and we have Article 53 of the European Patent Convention. However, this is really not much and not really focused on the ethical aspects of ICT patents or IPR in general. Yeah. Therefore, what we did now in the second step, we interviewed different stakeholders, and here we follow a little bit the approach also proposed by Oppenheimer, looking at the pharmaceutical IPR litigation problems, and we try to be quite comprehensive. We had almost 40 experts in research organizations, in ICT patent owning companies, telecom operators, ICT implementing companies, patent pools, open source software developers, SMEs, consumer organizations, patent attorneys, IP support services, patent offices, the European Commission, OECD, and also the academic experts. Therefore, broad list of stakeholders have been addressed. And the questionnaire was quite open, and it was looking at the pros and the cons of the current system, also looking for possible solutions, and also looking at the issue, what's the implication of open access, and finally on the ethical dimensions. And I'm only briefly reporting what were the insights so far. The majority of the interviewees didn't really perceive ethical issues. That means more than 50%, maybe even more. Because in general, ICT is not really a life-threatening or saving technology in general. However, there are exceptions. ICT has an impact on medical devices, medical technologies. And there are also indirect threats, issues like autonomous drivings, also drone technologies are heavily based on ICT, and therefore there might be some ethical dimensions here. And artificial intelligence, I will come back to this later, is also maybe also related to some ethical aspects. The telecom operators argue, okay, infrastructure they provide is in public interest, and therefore there's an ethical dimension here, like also the providing of healthcare. They put it on the same level. Also in developing countries, access to ICT is crucial, and we have seen here with Bitcoin, this works only if there is an access to the network. ICT implementing companies say, but these are really specific statements. They say, on the one hand, if public research-funded results are available, then they should be also available not only to the participants but to society as such. That means EU projects also now meanwhile ask for that. On the other hand, it is also perceived that there should be a fair return to the private R&D investment in the sense of an adequate protection via ICT patents. SME organizations, in general, questions whether maybe patents hinder the democratizing of innovation, especially that the SMEs are here handicapped in comparison to larger players. In contrast to here there is limited awareness of ethical aspect. The open source developing communities are a little bit more aware. They see that patents should not really restrict industry, government, or society. Here we had this term before, code is law. Especially open source is based on democratic principles, therefore there should be no restrictions. Also no restrictions to the internet via patents. And what is new is certainly the issue of software can also now change political views and influence processes in decision making, which are critical and has some really ethical implications. And therefore there is some awareness in the open source community. The patent pools interviews say, okay, there are ethical concerns if patents block networks, and there are also security issues based on ICT patents. Research organizations point to the fact that assuring a high level of quality of patents is an ethical issue, and we also should avoid patents avoiding SMEs entering the market, but it's also an ethical issue that the incentive function of patents should be assured. We shouldn't really challenge this aspect that patents have an important promoting function, especially also promoting technical progress, which is good for future generations. Privacy issues are also mentioned. Talks to the European Commission revealed, okay, they see not really an ethical aspect. The only thing what they mentioned is privacy and data protection issues, also related to artificial intelligence and robots. The patent offices or the examiners I talked to, they say, okay, that's a little bit different thing than in pharmaceuticals. However, there might be issues like autonomous weapons, drones, and cars, as already mentioned, and also the questions whether artificial intelligence producing patents are also the owners of the patents, or who are then the owners of the patents, was an interesting new question. Patent support service and attorneys see only here privacy issues maybe related to ICT patents. And consumer organizations were not so happy about patents which were granted challenging the data protection privacy concerns of individuals. That means they mentioned this Facebook patent on credit rating based on Facebook friends. Overall, there are direct ethical impacts of ICT patents if they restrict the access of life-saving technologies, medical devices, or infrastructures. There are indirect ethical impacts of ICT patents by promoting ethically ambivalent technologies threatening life, like autonomous cars, drones, and robots. Also, privacy and data protections are mentioned. Further ethical concerns is that patents should really assure the R&D incentivizing functions of patents on the one hand. On the other hand, quality has to be really kept on a high level, restricting patents which are maybe blocking markets. And maybe a future topic is whether artificial intelligence might be a creator of patents tomorrow. That means we are here at the very beginning of maybe a new debate, starting from the already well-developed debate regarding pharmaceutical patents. And because we have in the future certainly ICT technologies which are immediately life-threatening, we have the generic character of the ICT infrastructure we are all relying on. We have privacy and data protection aspects we are also personally affected by. And we have the inclusion of ICT for societies, therefore a digital divide, especially also in developing countries. Therefore, if we consider these aspects, we are able to contribute maybe to responsible research and innovation in the future. And finally, I thank the German Patent Office for putting a link to a now written survey, which is also covering these ethical aspects on their homepage. Therefore, if somebody interested in contributing to the survey, which is still online until the end of July, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Blind. Maybe you would just stay here with the agreement of Professor Drechsel, since you have to leave back to Berlin. If there are questions to you, 2-3 questions, that would be now the time to do so. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, one after the other, and you answer them together. You start, if we have a micro or you have a loud voice. Yeah.
My name is Tatiana. I teach at
Maybe you take the micro, it's not so nice. And then we have the two more, and then...
So, hello everybody. It's a very nice conference. Extremely happy of a little bit distinguishing from the previous day, the approach. So, my name is Petya Andreeva. I teach since 16 years as a freelance lecturer at the European University Business School Munich. My areas various courses specialized on management, and recently knowledge management, change, innovation, etc.
And the question is?
So my question is, the point of interest on patents, on the resource from the small and medium enterprises, because we know that they offer a lot of employment and sustaining the society. Also, last day we spoke about the private issue, how the patents, the investors are big companies that invest so much for investment, so we have to protect. But your point now, with this research, that we have to see from the other side, which not only patents for the European developed countries, for emerging economies also, what the influence is, and what about the small and medium enterprises? The people cannot afford it, controlling their patents or paying for patents, because we know that the bigger companies...
The question is whether there are effects on SMEs and developing emerging countries. Thank you. We continue with the two other questions you had. Thank you very much.
So I'm Kay Firth Butterfield, and I work in artificial intelligence ethics and law. And so I had a couple of questions. The first is about AI creating patents. And I wonder whether that is going to create more disparity, because obviously companies that have AI and use AI all the time, like for example Google and Facebook, will be able to create many more patents, and what pressures that will put on the patent system. And the other point was about life-threatening patents, and I wondered what your views were on lethal autonomous weapons patents.
Okay, and the third question was for you.
Ariane Rüdiger, freelance journalist. I would like to know, I mean, there is no life-threatening importance of IT in spite of AI and drones, for example. I mean, we are now seeing a massive offensive spreading of IoT technologies in almost every bit and piece of your private and official life. So IT is now clinging to every bit of our beings, making it life-threatening technology in most of its expressions over sooner or later. Like the electricity network, the traffic networks, the information networks, any kind of networks will be dependent on that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is a minimalization of the influence, which I rather don't like.
Okay, your answers.
Okay, last question. These are the statements of the experts. That means, indeed, the IoT dimension has not really been addressed by them. Yeah? But these are patent experts. These are no ethical experts. Yeah? And what I want to say is we are only at the starting point to discuss these ethical dimension of IoT and related things, and the few life-threatening aspects of ICT is certainly only a very narrow niche. An interesting point, the role of artificial intelligence creating patents, whether this might be even increase more the discrepancy. That's an interesting question. But I think before we can answer this question, it's not clear yet, at least for the experts I talked to, how to deal and how to treat patents created by artificial intelligence. Is that kind of a normal patent, or what is that? And indeed, then the big players like Google, but also maybe IBM and others, which have these capacities, might really further contribute to the concentration of patent activities, and we see that. And this leads me to the last issue regarding SMEs. For example, what we see in Germany, is a really a significant concentration of innovation in large companies. That means we have currently the situation that the 100 largest companies regarding R&D budget are responsible for 80% of all R&D in Germany. Yeah? And this is more or less similar to the figure of the concentrations in patents. And here, policymakers have to deal with it. There are programs at the national level. There is a new communication of the European Commission on supporting SMEs regarding IP. The question is, are these programs sufficient and effective? That's not the topic of the project. This is really a kind of an explorative activity, what we are doing, and we are just at the very beginning, as I said. Thank you.
Big applause for Professor Planck. Thank you very much, and a safe trip back to Berlin, and yeah, you still listen to us. Okay, Professor Drechsel, fake news, alternative news, or facts? The ICT is...
well, I do my best.
Yeah.
I will do my best not to talk about fake news. There are many problems about that term. I would like to ask you a question. Who of you has a Facebook account? Raise your hands. Yeah, quite many. I have to say, I was just a day ago, I was on the Facebook account of Jo Leinen, using Facebook as a source of political information. Very few. I'm quite astonished. The numbers we have also from Europe, but especially from the United States, is much higher. Maybe you are not even aware that you are consuming political news. It very much depends on how you define it. Yeah, and Twitter is yet another case. What is my topic all about? Yes, it is about Facebook. I will take Facebook as an example, but you could also use Twitter. You can also use Google as a search engine, because when you are in need of political news, you can use very, very different services we nowadays have on the internet, and they can be equally helpful. Why is this about innovation? Of course, Facebook is about innovation. It's a tool that provides us with many, many utilities that we may also like. You can keep in touch with your friends. That was the initial idea of Facebook, connecting friends. But Facebook is also used by firms who want to sell their products. No firm that is actually especially selling products to consumers can afford not to be on Facebook. And then, of course, Facebook is a wonderful tool of getting all of us engaged in a political debate. Whenever we have something to say to the public, you can express yourself. And it has proven in many instances, especially take the Arab countries and the Arab Spring, when Facebook became enormously important for also getting civil society engaged in a political change. So Facebook has many, many advantages. What is very peculiar about those three functions is that Facebook will always work the same way. But the implications are very, very different ones, whether you communicate with your friends, whether you sell products, or whether Facebook is actually used as a political communication platform, which is not only used by the citizens, but also the politicians. I mentioned Jo Leinen, and the political parties. Of course, there's the other debate. The first time I spoke about that topic, that was a little bit more than a year ago, and people blamed me. I'm blaming the audience for being stupid and all this. I can assist the very few of you who consume political news on the internet. You are not stupid. We are all the same. That's the message that we need to get. I will get to the point when I talk about psychology. We all share the same human psychology. We are not very different in that regard. But you all know about the debate. The newspapers nowadays are full, especially after Brexit and the election victory of Trump in the United States. I don't have to explain why Facebook is nowadays working as a filter bubble. We get a selection of the news in which we as individuals are interested in. If you want to see how this actually works out, go to a website the Wall Street Journal, where you have in parallel the news feeds, if you are a Trump supporter or if you are a supporter of Clinton on the election campaign, you get a very, very different selection of news, which clearly shows that you end up in a filter bubble. And what also happens is that you tend to communicate only in your own political community, which leads then to a radicalization and also polarization in society. It's one of the explanations that, for example, UK citizens who wanted to be in favor of remaining in the EU were completely convinced that, of course, the UK will vote for remaining simply because they didn't know anybody who would vote against, right? So you also, if you are in your own liberal filter bubble, maybe you get the wrong picture of what your own country really thinks about certain political issues. I recommend also the Germans, every now and then, but don't do it too often, go to the website of AfD, just to know what those people think about the world. If you do it too often, you get all that crap. So please be careful. That's the mechanism of Facebook. Of course, there's another development. Politicians and political parties, a big debate nowadays, right now in Germany with the upcoming elections. The internet can be used for so-called computational propaganda, especially the use of social bots. You get the impression that somebody, a human being, is actually talking to you over Facebook, but it is a computer program, nothing else. In the US campaign, the day after the election, of course, the election was going on under close scrutiny of political scientists following the election campaign on the internet. And on the following day of the election, there were the numbers that about a third of all tweets on Twitter in favor of Trump were actually launched by social bots. So that is also a development we have. It's an open question how much this mechanism contributed to Brexit and Trump's success in the election. We simply don't know, because it's also about the mind of human beings. And this is where I would also like to concentrate. This is how Facebook works. And what you can see here up front, it's not only about the algorithm. The algorithm is one element of a communication process which involves several human beings. It doesn't work without the human beings. There is a user who may post something on his or her Facebook site, like an opinion, like some news. This can also be a journalist. I will come to this particular aspect, because if you are nowadays, for example, a journalist in Poland or Hungary, maybe it's very important to also have Facebook as a platform for also spreading news, where it becomes more and more difficult. There are many, many journalists in Hungary who don't find an independent newspaper anymore, and then maybe in order to get involved, you need to post something on Facebook. So you spread that news, and then maybe another user of Facebook likes that message and shares it with the friends, and then Facebook has simply a technological problem. There are too many likes to share, and somehow you need to list those likes in the newsfeed of the recipient. And how do you do this? According to a business rationale. Facebook is a business, right? It's running a business. It wants to make money based on the payment of the advertising customers. So what you want to achieve is that Facebook users use Facebook as much as possible. You want to generate traffic. So what you are doing here is, or what the algorithm is doing, is to provide the recipient with the information that the recipient is most likely to like, period. So it's very much about consumer preference, nothing else, nothing else. From an economic perspective, highly efficient. No doubt about this, right? We get exactly the information we like. And this leads to that polarization of society when it comes to political information. And then the last step is you need to read. There was research done by Facebook staff members. You may look at it maybe a little bit critically because of this, but this I still think it's pretty reliable. It was based on investigating how users in the United States, more than 1 million users, consume news on the internet, and it turned out, just to summarize, that the most important factor in this communication process is the second one. It's the selection by Facebook users and the setting of a like. It is not the algorithm. The algorithm is contributing to this mechanism of creating filter bubbles and echo chambers, and at the very end, until the friend reads it, you get a much more polarized consumption pattern of political news. But all the different steps contributed. And this is very important also for regulating Facebook and that mechanism, because it's not only about the algorithm, it's very much about the mindset of the users. And we should not forget about this. So can we regulate what Facebook is doing here and producing a potentially very harmful effect on the democratic process? The starting point here is that Facebook is simply doing or running a particular business, maximizing income. That's certainly legitimate. But if we want to regulate it from a media perspective, the question is, how can we categorize Facebook? And that is a difficulty. Why? Facebook is not acting as a newspaper publisher. It's not making an editorial choice, right? It's not selecting the news. It's not printing or delivering its own opinions and comments on political developments. That's not what Facebook is doing. The providers of the information are the users themselves that go online, right? Yet Facebook is a gatekeeper because it's selecting out certain information. Which is based on that algorithm. At the same time, it has more like a function like what I would call a digital kiosk. If you go to a newspaper stand, you would like to have the whole range of political views and newspapers. You don't want the kiosk to select among different newspapers. I heard about the situation in Poland nowadays. If you go to a gas station, you have a hard time to find Gazeta Wyborcza. Why? The gas station is owned by the state, and Gazeta Wyborcza is the major opposition newspaper, and it always ends up at the under a pile of different newspapers. It's always very much at the bottom of the pile. You don't see it anymore. This is how it works, but that's not how we would like to have a kiosk, right? It should not be biased. And that is the critical question. Because on the one hand, now we want to keep Facebook reliable for not making editorial choices. We want Facebook to single out maybe fake news, and it was mentioned before, or hate speech. But at the same time, we don't want Facebook to be biased, politically biased. There was a big debate already during the presidential campaign in the United States when Facebook staff members suddenly saw, oh, maybe something is going wrong here. This whole system very much pushes Trump. Maybe we should erase opinions in favor of Trump. And then all the political parties and all politicians said, no, you're not allowed to do this. You need to be neutral. So that is a big problem here. Now, I will not talk too much about it. Of course, I have my own opinion. Right now, we have a very intensive debate here in Germany. Before the German Bundestag, there is now a law proposed by the Social Democratic Justice Minister for enforcing the law. That's the wording of the title of the law, Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, against digital platforms. And it is very much focused on hate speech. I only mention hate speech is not the whole problem. When we talk about fake news is not the same as hate speech. Not every fake news is harming the interests of an individual person or a group of people. This is not the case. I will come with an example later on. The problem here, why we have a very heated debate on this, and I'm also very critical on this, is that the law, which will impose very high fines on illegal content, on the distribution of illegal content through social platforms, up to 50 million euros, may lead to self-censorship by Facebook and other social platforms. And I am personally, I'm most worried that this would give a very bad example for other European countries where post-truth politics has already reached the power level and already dominates the government. Because if you have a government that now has a very strong weapon against opposition, meanings if you have, for example, a opposition journalist who writes about a scandal of a politician in charge, and then the government comes and says, oh, that's not true, and you haven't proven that this is true, hence it needs to be deleted, and you go after Facebook, you've got a problem. Right? So it's very much, the problem is very much between the extremes of protecting the individuals that are concerned by hate speech, and on the other hand, aren't we harming freedom of speech in the first place? The real problem is this one. We should also be concerned, and maybe even more concerned, about the psychology of the users. And this is now a starting debate, how to deal with the users, and that's maybe what I can contribute. You don't read so much about this in the newspapers nowadays. The question really is, how does the overall system work? What is going wrong here? And what I would like to propose to you is to understand that we have to think about ourselves and how we make political decisions. And that this is very much about social psychology. And there are two aspects. The first one is a problem that we all have. We don't know everything when it comes to making decisions. Problems are very, very complex, and citizens have a problem to understand the complexities of individual problems. So what we all need to do, maybe some of us are more informed as members of society than others, but what we all need to do is to decide based on insufficient information. And what we do is we work with approximations, what we usually would call heuristics. We have to make decisions under uncertainty. What does this mean in the political process? People very much rely on their, I use a term from yesterday's talk in the evening, intuition or feelings. So if we don't have the information, our intellect is insufficient to help us in decision making, we rely on feelings. And politicians do the same. They allude to your feelings. Like using very simple words, the word big doesn't surprise you anymore, right? Very much used by a certain politician now in charge in the United States. Reliance on information which is at hand. Don't use complicated empirical data. Allude to what people perceive in their daily lives. Right? Which is much more intuitive to people for the decision making. And there is a particular availability heuristics. If you hear the same opinion over and over again, you are much more likely to believe in it. Yeah? The next problem, confirmation bias. What do I mean by confirmation bias? We all like to believe in a world which confirms in what we believe in. Right? So if somebody presents us a world which is not in compliance with what we believe in, we are resisting. And we are much more likely to accept facts that are in line with what we believe in. And this somehow explains the very functioning of post-truth politics. Here a citation from Trump in his political campaign. Climate change is a hoax spread by the Chinese government to harm American economy. Many people believed in this. Why? Because they want to drive big cars. They want to be sure that they are not doing harm to anybody. That's their lifestyle. And then you go for an explanation of the world that confirms your own identity and in what you believe in. So what we are seeing here is, it is a reversal on how political decision-making should work. In a more sophisticated, intelligence-based system of politics, we would first want to identify the problem based on facts. There is a problem with climate change, and then we would like to make a normative judgment based on how to solve the problem. Maybe there are different solutions and different ways of doing things, and then we decide between the different ways of solving the problem. And what we see here is that post-truth politics is turning this around. First, people make a judgment on what they actually want to believe in, and then they look in the market of different facts that are presented to them, and they choose the facts that is closest to their beliefs. And I could give you a whole range of different political statements. Also look at how post-truth politics works, or populist politicians argue, and you can always apply that mechanism. It works very, very nicely, and it's very simplistic, a very simplistic way of doing politics. My conclusions: post-truth politics and fake news is not at all a new problem. It has always existed. The problem is, why does it still work in a world where we get full information over the internet? We can have access to everything. And it's not only a problem linked to social platforms. Why was post-truth politics so successful in the UK and the US? I think it's very much about the media. In the United States, maybe about TV. In the UK, maybe more about newspapers. By far not only about social networks. And how can we confront and how can we solve the problem? We really need to go back to the values. It's a matter in what people believe in. And what we should focus upon are the constitutional values. And this is often something that we forget about. And this is another reason why I'm more critical about the German law, because we lose out of sight the particular value of freedom of speech. We have to defend our constitutional values. But we also have to confront those who do not stick to the constitutional values. We don't have there are many, many people. I called Facebook also a seismograph on the previous slide, a seismograph of our modern societies. From Facebook, we get the information about the feelings of people. And we have to do something about the feelings. We need more support for constitutional values. Thank you very much.
Absolute fascinating and most interesting. And I have at least 10 questions, and if I look in your faces, there are about 100 or 1,000 questions. But unfortunately, we have no time because this is food for thought. And we have had a powerful panel this morning, so much input, and I think the purpose is to open minds, to have these ideas with you. And now, unfortunately, not to really destroy the whole program, we go to deep breaths. And Christoph, you take over. I'm a bit disruptive, but I know how programs run. If you don't respect the timetable, then you take over and deep breathe. And in the coffee break, we have our panelists to answer questions. Christoph, take over. I know, but if we start with one question, it's unfair to the 10 who have as well questions. Do it in the break. No deep breath. Okay, then I see that we don't have deep breaths, but a prayer with the bishop. And the bishop has now to think about the prayer, so we have 2-3 questions before we make the prayer. We are flexible. Then you would be the first one, and I take 2 more. You and give the micro, and then you. Then you have the 3. too late.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Martin Cisilski, and I had the pleasure also to work a couple of years in the Silicon Valley. And I would like to address one question, what I was kind of missing, and maybe mentioning also one of our filter bubbles in that context, and this is the sustainability of the whole internet infrastructure. Pointing also at you, you also talked already yesterday a little about it, but I would like to go deeper because, I mean, we all have our smartphones in our pockets, and we all know that the cobalt of the batteries is, you know, it's taken by children as labor from mines in the Congo, for example. And the cables done by quartz, we go for beaches already to create the glass of our tablets and the glass for our smartphones. So we point at Trump, but we are not really good in pointing at the climate issues and the sustainable issues of ICT, and I would like to raise that question also. How can you address that in your everyday work, or is it part of your work to address that? Because you were mentioning also the energy consumption of mining bitcoins, and this is enormous. Thank you.
Okay, yes, good question. Next one was over here.
Yeah, in a way, it follows from that into the question of the wider ecology that we are having here, primarily on the last talk. Two quick points. One is you had the diagram of how Facebook works, and I think this now needs to be refined slightly because the likes do not necessarily any longer come from humans. The vast majority of these likes is computer generated from other AIs. So the input is AI, the output is AI, and with that we get another level, I think, of distortion, which I think we don't quite understand yet how to deal with that. And that leads me in a way also to your last slide. I think you're absolutely right. Low quality journalism has contributed to this, but low quality journalism is again partly caused by these social media developments because quality journalism costs money. And we are getting increasingly used to get everything for free or for advertising or not seeing the costs for it. So I think part of the problem is that good journalism was driven out by free journalism, by internet sources, newspapers firing people and replacing them by apprentices who simply read blogs or Facebook. So I think we have here a wider market problem or financial problem. How can we finance high-quality journalism, given that the alternative is seemingly free, sugary, low nutrition value journalism, which pushes the good journalism out?
Okay.
Oops. Yes, my question is a bit of a broad. It regards Ethernet, education, and information. In general language, you say you have education at home and you get instruction at school and university. Now today, due to the media or the digitalization, you get access to a lot of data and thus information. For example, I can go into the internet, download a 3D print of a gun and then go to the school and do some things. Also, you can go to some other pages and create a retrovirus at a kitchen, for example. If I have the know-how, I can do this. But is it missing some kind of education that can bring you some kind of insight out? What can I do with the information I have? And second of all, regarding Facebook and all this kind of media, Simon Bolivar, I come from Colombia, used to say the means of destruction of a population lies on the education you have, because if you have a literacy in a population, you will separate. And we have seen with Trump, for example, that the media or the population was the most separated and divided as never in the United States with Trump. So my question is to you, does the manipulation of media correlate to the level of education? And what comes first, education? And how, for example, when I am a politic,
okay,
the
question is understood. At the very end, you had not yet had a question, very end. Yeah, not you, the other one. You had already a question before, so sorry. with balancing.
So my question is along the lines of this discussion around Facebook and the fake news. So on one side, we're saying good journalism, but if you watch CNN and Fox News, it's like you're watching two different worlds. And that's where is the traditional source of information, whereas if you go online on Twitter, then that whole confirmation bias, like how you said during Brexit, a lot of us could imagine that anybody would vote to leave the European Union. So what do you see as where is this going to settle finally? What would be the solution in the end? Because it's hard to, would the mainstream media sort of start being more responsible and actually give a more balanced view where people will start trusting that, or something would change in the online sources because right now you can post anything and there's no way to trust the validity of that information. So where is it really going to settle down is my question.
Mm-hmm. Who? Yeah?
My question is also to Professor Drexel. I really found your last bit interesting where you talked about value systems. And because I feel it's more like a comment, I feel that if you say that it should not be normative judgments but analysis of facts that should guide our interpretation of the news, I say it's a little bit circular because our analysis of facts itself is based on our normative value judgments. So the most important thing I feel is to have an education which allows us to have an open mind enough and at the same time allows us to check our value judgments to make them more inclusive and filter out facts. So I would like to refer back to Mr. Glaser's presentation yesterday of how we as human beings are just so stuck to our opinions. And so long as our education doesn't teach us to be open-minded enough to change our opinions and make our opinions more inclusive, it would be continuously circular.
Mm-hmm. Rachita? Yeah.
I think you could hear me, so my question,
but not the others. So.
Professor Drexel, and it was really fascinating to see the systematics of how information is really getting filtered as it reaches us. But what bothers me more is how this same digitization, social media, open source information is today also used, for example, for almost ease of terrorism. It is so easy today to get onto the internet and to see how to make a bomb, and then who knows how it will be used. So in what way can the ethicality of what type of information is this digitization reaching the world be really monitored, and how can, because there is a lot of controversy also around where Google is asked to sort of censor some information out. Sometimes it agrees, sometimes it doesn't. So there is a lot of discussion and debate around this area, and I would like to hear your views on that.
So then we take, nevertheless, two more, because this is fascinating. Yeah, you, the lady.
Hi, I'm Praveena, a law student from Sri Lanka. My question is, like in Sri Lanka, the government changes, it says because of the social media influence, which was conducted by the political parties, the youth more voted to the political parties which promote from the social media network. My question is, because of the old generation is not more into the social media, they are blaming to the youth that they are taking the political views from the social media and they are voting from the views that are interpreted through social media. So my question is it ethical to blame to the youth because they are more into social media and they take information from social media? It is true that we want to figure out whether this information is true or false, but my question is it ethical to blame the youth by the old generation because they are more into these social media networks. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Who was it here?
Okay, thank you. I am Maria Francesca Retulli. I'm a PhD student in constitutional law. I also have a question to Professor Drexel, because you only highlighted some psychological and social issues for the fake news, but while there's some literature who highlights some competition issues, for example, the dominance of some social media actors, or maybe the governance, the business model of these actors. For example, you know, Morozov or Casilli in France. Do you think that dominance or governance of platforms could rise an issue too?
Okay. Now 2 more, and then I think we have somehow to finish, otherwise we disrupt the whole program. You, and then the blockchain owner again, and then, yeah.
So actually, I think some of the question I'm asking is kind of overlapping a lot of these questions, but I see this whole thing as 3 categories. One is your value system, 2 is some kind of regulatory body, and 3rd is information. These are the 3 components I see, and information is available in abundant. Now, the thing is, if we were to get a regulatory body or some kind of mechanism to actually regulate this information, then my question is, it seems to be more proactive, it's more reactive rather than proactive. So how can we keep the regulation at pace with very fastly moving information? Thank you.
And so my question is about Bitcoin, but actually about Ethereum, which I also own Ether. And so the first point is the money laundering point that you raised. And there was a case in Miami where the judge there decided that Bitcoin was not a currency for money laundering purposes. And I'd just be interested in your view on that. And the other thing that I'm interested in is the self-regulation and regulation of cryptocurrencies. So with Ethereum, we had the recent issue around the DAO and the collapse of the DAO, and how effectively this wild west of cryptocurrency owners had to go back and do something about creating a safer use of cryptocurrency. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very useful to have questions, and apology for the others. I think we have somehow to get around this first session, otherwise the others will suffer. And I propose that in the same order, you answer as short as possible. And Christoph, you take over, because I have to contact my office in Brussels before 11. But if you start, and then you have the bulk of the questions. And look how you manage the time then. Thank you.
Thanks. Very challenging questions. I think that it's very difficult to draw a line that could divide the freedom of speech from the fake news. This is the real problem. Of course, the freedom of speech must be defended as fundamental right. The fake news could be prohibited, but the question is when freedom of speech will turn into a fake news. It is the first question. Probably, but I don't have any certainty. When a news has been manipulated and tailored to the taste of the net citizen, it could be a fake news. Second problem is the social network could be the real judge of fake news. In my opinion, no, for constitutional reason, because if we want to follow the due process of the European Court and also the other court, they are private body, and so they could not be in charge of regulatory power or of judicial power. It's another question in which terms they could be considered responsible and accountable. In my opinion, they must be accountable in case of fake news, but they could not be the judge of fake news. Just to confirm the constitutional value on this on internet. That's all for me.
maybe you start.
Because I have only a couple of issues, probably. So thank you very much for the questions. I think we have to be very clear about the blockchain technology. This is totally different from other technologies we have. It's not centralized, it is decentralized, and there's no single person or group or organization controlling it. So it is a platform, as it's usually or sometimes called, and in that sense, it is not responsible for what is going on over there, or what is going on the network, so it's in some sense it's a mirror of the real world. We have money laundering, we have selling of illegal drugs, firearms, whatever, in the real world, and if we really try to impose a regulation on it from the outside and say we have to be, there must be a guarantee that these things that do not happen, then we would have to go without the technology. Then it would not work. So nevertheless, I think that some self-regulation might be possible from the inside, but it is different from the case of Facebook even. So because in Facebook you can still say it can control something, but there are alternatives to Facebook. I mean, also regarding your issues, we have to say social media is not absolute. For example, there are now alternatives to Twitter, and some users are turning to these alternatives because they are being blocked on Twitter. And so, I mean, we should not focus too much on one platform. And the last question was about the ethical aspects. Yes, I mentioned them very briefly because we do not have much time. But I agree that there are these issues with mining is costing a lot of energy. But I mean, blockchain or Bitcoin has been around since 2008, or not in this intensity for that time. So only a few years. So we will have to see what the net total is of the energy use. So we'll have to see in a few years how it is, and I'm sure that even in this regard, with regard to energy and scarce other resources, it will turn out, we can only review this in a few years, yes. But I agree there are problems. So.
Professor Drexel. Well, difficult task to answer so many questions. When I started my work on that topic, actually my focus was on terrorism and the segregation of a debate among young Muslims here in Europe who no longer seem to be part of the larger society. And the second intuition actually came from competition policy, because I'm more a competition lawyer, and I wanted to see whether we can do something about that phenomenon, since it's very much business-driven, the whole phenomenon. And then later on, the political development went on, and we saw the broader societal implications and democratic implications. But indeed, I think there's no real difference whether we talk about polarization of our modern societies along religious lines and fanatism, religious fanatism, or along populist lines. Maybe even the mindset of people who would support such movements is pretty similar, whether you support a populist movement or a fundamentalist Muslim tendency. It's maybe the same. The point is that we can deal with those issues in very, very different ways under criminal law. Of course, when it comes to terrorism, we know it's illegal. We can do much more about it in prosecuting such people, especially when we find instructions for building bombs and so on. Right? So that's very clear. It becomes much more difficult when we enter the sphere of hate speech, because if you what has happened here in Germany, you spread maybe a quote of a political person from the opposite camp, and it was completely invented to discredit that person. This is also something that is covered by the German law. But whether this is true or not, it may be very, very unclear. So that is where it becomes very, very complicated. With competition law, we can't get very far. There were two studies conducted by the German government on how quickly social platforms, namely 3 of them, react to complaints concerning hate speech, namely YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. YouTube was best. YouTube improved enormously. Facebook, within half a year, between the two studies, fell back a bit, and Twitter was a horror. 1% reaction within 1 day, not more, and it didn't change. Is the reason market dominance? No, quite on the contrary. Some people argue Twitter is a bad business model. They are under threat of going bankrupt, and therefore they can't simply afford to kick those messages out, because it still produces some income. So basically the point is that the underlying business rationale basically is the same, but what we see is maybe more ethical responsibility by Google and YouTube, and Facebook maybe in between. But I also think that Facebook is aware of the problem, and you cannot simply argue Facebook is unwilling to do something against it. There is, and here I come to the other problem, whether it's only about human beings. Of course it's not. I mentioned the problem of social bots and computational propaganda. This is actually something that we have just learned. And it shows an example where we are actually running after the development. So Brexit has taken place, and the presidential campaign has taken place, and we see the outcome, and now we understand that computational propaganda was very much part of it. And for the next elections, we already think about what we can do. It becomes a problem for the political parties, and they have to define themselves. For example, in Germany, all parties represented in the current Bundestag, they gave a pledge that they will not use social bots, whereas both presidential campaign candidates in the United States, also Hillary Clinton, used social bots, right? But this was not something that our right-wing party, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, would do. So they have said, no, we will use social bots. But I think citizens should know about it. And it's very difficult when it comes to the use of social bots to identify who is the originator. Was it really the party, or was it some kind of independent supporter? What do you do about those? So it's very, very difficult also to regulate that phenomenon, right? So Facebook, if you go to the help site, it has now it provides information on how to identify social bots. Basically, please be aware, if you get messages throughout the night and every 5 seconds another tweet appears on Twitter and so on, then you need to be concerned maybe, or on Facebook, this is a social bot. Of course, that was maybe the situation now, or has been the situation now, and tomorrow it changes already. Of course, you can adapt your social bots and to circumvent such information and to make it more credible that this is a human being, right? So that is a problem that the situation constantly changes, and we constantly need to learn. And it is a matter, I think, very much about education. There is a huge problem about how to guarantee quality journalism on the internet. Of course, internet has made life much harder for the traditional press, especially in the UK. There is a debate among journalists what journalism should achieve, whether they should educate the people, which is more the traditional view. I don't necessarily like the term educate, but it's elitist in a way. People are told what they need, how they need to act, what they should believe in. That's also what I'm telling. You should support constitutional values and so on. So that is very elitist, and there's a strong movement, especially in the UK, among journalists who argue we should not do this. We are simply arbitrators among different politicians, and we manage this, and it's very much about political support and nothing else. I think this is wrong. It should not be like this. And we have a huge societal challenge on how to guarantee quality journalism. Just to mention one example from the political debate in Germany, AfD is very high on its political agenda, argues that we should abolish our system of financing public TV. Why? If you get rid of it, public TV will lose, and then quality journalism will go down. That's part of the political agenda. And also in the United States, if you reduce financing for public schools and education, in the future you may get more support. That's also quite clear. So there is this link between education, general education, and also political debate. And at the very end, Lenin said it yesterday. Look at in the United States now, Trump arguing we should go back to the coal industry. This is very much harming the environment. The question is this good or bad? It's bad for the United States. The point is, if you are basing your political agenda on wrong facts, you are doing harm to your own country, because you are not offering solutions to the real problems, like climate change. So this is also enormously important. It's not only about democracy and the democratic debate, it is about the future of our societies at large, and this needs to be built on a particular democratic culture, and there's a risk of losing it, and I have a very hard time to predict where we will be in 10 years. I'm now very much in discussion with also people in communication sciences and journalism. I'm also a member of the Bavarian Academy of Social Science, and we are currently putting up a large research project on how to deal with facts in sciences and journalism and political debate, to link the different fields. Many of those people also argue, also political scientists argue, that we are enormously quick to learn. We now know about those problems, and we get more cautious about what we read on the internet, and maybe now we also change our consumption pattern. Maybe we go to the different sites of quality newspapers. When I want to get information from the UK, I nowadays go to The Guardian, which has made a very conscious decision not to build up a paywall for the users. It's still free, and they very much rely on money giving to them for free. And that's their agenda. So also newspapers need to work with it. And the reason why they are doing it is we need to address the poor. The poor people should go to our website and get the information from our website, and should not only have to rely on the Sun and so on and the other newspapers. I hope I answered most. Yes, one last point. I don't blame any user of the internet. That is not the point. But maybe if you are a user of the internet and you consume information, I very much advocated that we should maintain Facebook as a major source, especially in jurisdictions where democracy is under threat, where the media system has already failed or is about to fail. Then we need to rely on social platforms even more. Therefore, I would never blame any user, but the user or the consumer of news on the internet has to be much more knowledgeable and critical, because you don't have control on the quality. And if you want to have more information on what fake news are, it's an enormously complex topic. An article of mine will be published in a couple of weeks in German, I'm afraid, but those who read German, it will be in ZUM, Zeitschrift für Urheber- und Medienrecht, next month in July. And there I will also discuss the law in Germany, the proposal, and there is also part of it is on different forms of fake news, and I would very much agree with my colleague Giovanna, that it's not possible to judge on what is fake news. That is too complex, and we should maybe stay away from that term in the first place.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. I think this was an excellent, fascinating panel. We traded the breathing and relaxation session against a discussion, and I would say it was worth it. Thank you so much again. We will now have a break. We are a little bit behind schedule. We will recommence at 11:25, and we will have the big honor and pleasure to have Bishop Sorrento with us, and he will energize us with the prayer. So let's be back at 11:25 and continue the discussion then on ethics, economics, and the artificial intelligence. Nee, es war gut. Ich glaube, es war gut. Also ich fand The bishop requested for us to do a short breathing technique before the prayers. You want me to do that?
Yes, you do, no?
Okay, okay.
In the other case, it's a Colombian here that is a specialist.
Yes. Hi.
Maybe
Yeah.
for you. No, please
Okay.
do.
It's okay. So then let's do as we learned yesterday. Do we have the Schalder? He's a member of the advisory board of the World Forum for Ethics in Business, and I can say that he has been with the World Forum since its inception, since the first conference in the European Parliament in 2006. He's the CEO of ConFirst and will be moderating the session on ethics, economics, and artificial intelligence. Mr. Conrad, please.
Do you want me to call up the other panelists now as well? Would you please come up so that I not feel alone here? Can you hear me? So welcome to this panel number 5. As far as the details of the participants in the panel, you find them in the internet, abstracts of their live CVs, normally we call this. I would like to give a overall perspective as to what we are really doing and why we are here. So that you can place the contributions of the panel members better in the overall environment. In the Indian philosophy, you may have heard there are the Vedic books. And in the Vedic books, you find a chapter which has been also documented by Sri Ravi Shankar, that the life on this planet is taking part in cycles of 20,000 years. 4 times, divided into 4 times 5,000 years. These ages of each 5,000 years have different characteristics. And right now we are at the end of one of these ages called Kali Yuga. And it was characterized, as we all know, by fight and war and fight. And we are just right now on the step to the so-called Golden Age, which is the next 5,000 years. Now, what can be a bigger step than moving from the 5,000 years of war to the 5,000 years of golden age? In my presentations, I basically give an outlook that human beings will have capacities and abilities which we can see today only in a selected number of masters on this planet. Now you can imagine if we want to move into such capacities, we better clean up first. And we will have major tasks ahead. And the last panel, in fact, has been showing us the urgency and the major change which is going to happen. And here we are full of questions. How the heck are we going to handle this? Last night in the Audi Max, it got very obvious and very clear that with our tools at hand today, which were used from the past, this will not be possible. And the really special word which came out and which Sri Ravi Shankar pointed out is really called the intuition. I'm an engineer. I've learned to do everything in a systematic manner and to think before I do something. This is not going to work anymore because my thinking is going to be so slow that I'm not going to be able to handle the complexities of the future. And I'm sure this is going to happen with many of us in the future. So my present task in life is to get into an engineer of feeling, means intuition. To really be able to grasp what needs to be done and to be really fair. And as we're talking on how are we going to handle, for example, fake news, and I was thinking about it, I thought, this is really difficult because with my thinking and the data at hand, I'm not going to have a proper decision available to me. And then I said, okay, intuition is going to help. It's the only piece. Intuition is a word which is used in Germany because here in Germany we are not really, almost I would have said allowed to use the word spirituality. Intuition really is the connection, when you ask a quantum physicist, is the connection to the unified field. And this is where all the knowledge is, and this is what we need to learn. And therefore, the task for each of us in the future will be, how do I get my intuition very well placed? Very big capacity. This is the tool of the future. And last night, Sri spelled out very clearly, your intuition only works if you are relaxed. And then imagine all the many people around us who are controlled by diaries of 5-minute appointments and how much relaxation they have and how their intuition is working nowadays. And here you have the exact explanation why so many things go wrong, because they cannot use their intuition because it's like a frequency which is distorted. So this is the overall dimension of what we have at hand. And it really it goes back to us, how we will handle this if we're able to come to ourselves, to handle ourselves, to manage ourselves, to be relaxed and to really fortify big time our intuition. That's the task. And now we will have one tool called artificial intelligence as part of that whole big new world. And then with our intuition, we will be able to look at it, because artificial intelligence often is looked at as black box. I don't know what's happening inside. And I need to trust what's happening inside. It's like fake news. And how the hell do I get this trust? Unless I have this intuition which tells me this black box is working right or wrong. Because we want to understand, and we need to depend on it, as we know already. We have seen this many times. So that I want to give you on the way as we are moving into our panel and into the different contributions of the panelists. And then I would like to ask Professor Schäfer to start with his presentation.
Okay, clicker. Many thanks indeed for the kind invitation to speak here. It's always a particular pleasure for me to come back to the university and to the city where I graduated 21 years ago, before leaving to another part of the Hohenzollern-Stuart Empire, the northernmost part of the hegemony, and working in Scotland in the School of Law. That really is always a very, very special moment for me. My brief is to talk in 10 to 15 minutes about a massive theme, the impact artificial intelligence is having on modern policing. And I wanted to start with an anecdote from 21 years ago when I was a student here. I decided it doesn't quite fit into the logic of the talk, so I will start slightly differently, but rest assured you don't get away without some anecdotes from my life during this talk. So the first part will deal with some emerging issues that we are at least aware of by now, some problems that we have identified. From an ethical perspective, problems we know of, they are probably the least risky ones because we can start developing answers and theories. And in the second part, I want to indicate some of the issues that, at least in Europe, at the moment have maybe slightly been less discussed and where I think some interesting emerging issues can emerge. So, policing and AI, what do people think about when they hear about the use of artificial intelligence in police work? There is a public imagination fueled by things like this. Minority Report, the ability to use powerful algorithms, analyze data, and predict crimes before they happen, intervene before any harm is done. And then obviously, Robocop, the sharp end of law enforcement, robots that autonomously and without direct human control make decisions also about the use of lethal or quasi-lethal force. So we have both the prevention of crime through big data, number crunching, and potentially an embodied AI, also the direct use of state force in the application of legal rules. Where are we by now? Is that fantasy? Is this reality? Well, last year we had for the first time an event where a human being, a criminal, a kidnapper, was killed by something that, at least in a bad light, looks a little bit like a robot and an AI. It was at this point still fully under human control. It was remotely controlled, more like a drone, but it did have sensors on board. It did make certain types of decisions just in order not to bump into things and to use the weapons efficiently. So here we have, I think, an emerging real-life application of direct physical use of power by robots, by embedded AIs. And we also have increasingly stories about the use of algorithms, AI systems, machine learning systems in the criminal justice system, sometimes with devastating consequences. This year from the US, a significant number of US states are using a proprietary piece of software that assists judges in sentencing decisions. One important aspect of that is predict the likelihood of recidivism, that crimes will be committed again after release. It has now been shown that this software is systematically biased against ethnic minority convicts or applicants, simply because not because the algorithm is racist, but simply because the data sets on which it is trained embody 30 years, well, hundreds of years of discriminatory law enforcement practices. So all the data that the algorithm works from and learns from is produced by humans, and with that amplifies and magnifies some of the old biases that the justice system always had. In the UK, we are starting to do the same thing. We are using it for bail decision, custody decision. So we have someone arrested, not yet convicted of a crime, and the decision will be, should he be released or should she be released on bail, and under which condition is that a rational decision to make. So here we get the Minority Report scenario in real life. All these applications are about the prediction of future dangerousness rather than about an assessment of past activities. What are the ethical and legal problems? What are the known problems? As I said, it replicates and amplifies potentially existing biases. If our data sets are produced by an inherently unjust or biased system, the AIs will pick that up and they will learn from us. If you've seen another movie, Training Day, an enthusiastic young rookie full of enthusiasm and idealism falls into the hand of a much older, cynical police officer and learns the ropes from him. Within 24 hours, he's mildly corrupt. And that is exactly what's happening with our AIs. They are like little children, and they learn from us, and they also learn our bad habits. And some of the problem is that we don't realize this. Not that these algorithms are biased, well, we are as well, but that we don't realize any longer that they are biased and therefore take the decisions with maybe less scrutiny than we would with another human. As a result, we have a weakening of procedural scrutiny and control. We are less likely to question the decision of the algorithm than we would be with a human being, and IP and proprietary software amplifies this problem. Especially in the US, we have now a variety of stories where the defendant tried to challenge the accuracy of data that was produced against them in trial. That was partly DNA analysis algorithms. This was crime prediction algorithms of the type I described. And they were essentially told these are proprietary, they are developed by private sector companies, and they evoke trade secret law to prevent scrutiny in open proceedings. Firstly, I think this is totally unacceptable. It is deeply unethical. It is also a pretense. And the people here in this building know that better than anyone, and I think they can really help us with, because obviously in patent litigation and copyright litigations, we have developed very robust mechanisms to disclose information for the purpose of establishing the truth. So these claims that fear of disclosing information, losing a trade advantage are, I think, pretextual. They indicate that even the developers do not really trust their own systems. They are worried not so much that the competitor will find them, but that inherent flaws of them are revealed. And it is totally unacceptable for a state to engage with private sector on these terms. If it is used in trial, if it is used in the justice system, what the Americans have is confrontation clause, efficient scrutiny must trump all private proprietary interests. That must be, I think, the baseline for any application of AI in the justice system. I think, however, the problems go further than individual bad pieces of software and individual bad pieces of algorithms. It also changes potentially. We have police that looks tough. And again, that were encouraged to acquire, as part of an economic strategy, military-grade weapons and engage with the citizen increasingly as an almost military organization. In the military field, we have a very live and ongoing discussion about the use of deadly force by robots. There is a UN moratorium now on the use of battlefield robots. We don't have it in the police sector as yet, and that was good enough in the past, where the two spheres were strictly separated. But if we now have dual-use robot technology that bridges these borders, I think we need at least the same type of ethical scrutiny that we find in the military field also applied in the police. And we have the looks nice approach that could be nicer than that. The police officer as a member of the community and community policing. All very, very laudable, all driven by big data and algorithms. Not a bad thing in itself, but it changes potentially the way we interact with the police and think about the police. In the UK, in particular, big data and the availability of analytic tools drives a reconceptualization of the role of the police officer to the solution of pretty much all social ills. Not any longer just crime, truancy, children not being at school, low-level antisocial behavior, parents not looking properly after their children. So we built multi-professional teams of teachers, medical professionals, social workers, and police to share their data and identify in advance people at risk. Not any longer criminals, people at risk, potential victims. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, don't get me wrong. This is potentially what we want, but we should do it consciously, and we should be aware that not so much the ethics, but the ethos of data handling between these different agencies is very, very different. It's different to be a virtuous police officer from being a virtuous teacher or a virtuous medical doctor. And as we share our data and use the same analytical tools and blur the boundaries between social responsibility, I think we inadvertently are changing the nature of policing in ways that might, in the end, turn out to be even more dangerous than what we are doing. In the prayer, you mentioned prostitution. It is very laudable, I think, of our police to use these tools to spot in advance children at risk of trafficking, to help them and to protect them. But we mustn't forget the police is still the sharp edge of the state and the criminal system. So on the one hand, these young victims of trafficking are protected from a life of prostitution, but in the very next day they will get extradited as illegal immigrants. There is, when we talk about policing, always a threat of force. And I think the danger of algorithmic control and multi-agency cooperation is sometimes to overlook that these different professions do have, for good reasons, a very different ethos and a very different approach to data handling, and these boundaries shouldn't be blurred. In Europe in particular, we often think of that as a data protection issue, and we try to use the General Data Protection Regulation. I'm getting increasingly cautious about that. I don't think that is the right approach. The General Data Protection Regulation, or data protection, is about Orwell, the state knowing too much about individual citizens. But that was not the problem in the algorithms I described, the biased ones. There the state didn't know enough about an individual, didn't take them serious as individuals, treated them only as representatives of a group. So the more appropriate analogy for this type of problem is, I think, Kafka's Castle. The ability of the citizen to challenge decisions, to have adequate remedies, to have adequate scrutiny, to reassert themselves as individuals. And I don't think, for a lot of reasons, that the GDPR is necessarily the right remedy for that or the right constraint for that. I'm talking about it only very, very briefly because this is an emerging discussion that you can read up on. But I think the notion of fairness in data protection law is very different from the notion of fairness in criminal justice, for instance, or in judicial review. I also think that sometimes the things the data protection regime wants are detrimental to the type of fairness we want in criminal justice. The discriminatory algorithm, if I want to show I was discriminated against, I want to show that all these other people, even though they are very similar to me, got a better deal. For that, I need their data, not my data. So I think we are in danger of reducing this to a data protection problem rather than treating it as a genuine problem of what do we want from our police, what do we want from the criminal justice system, what is the appropriate notion of fairness. Now the emerging issues, and I'm afraid I will have to talk to that rather quickly, but one of our organizers just submitted or co-authored this brilliant and really groundbreaking report on automated cars and their ethics. And I love this report, and I gave it to our Royal Society for Engineering, but one thing is missing, I think, because the police was missing, I think, to a certain extent at least. Whereas in reality, for most of you, for most of us here, I'm pretty certain the one way in your life you will interact with the police is not as part of a criminal investigation. Hopefully not as a suspect. Hopefully also not as a victim, obviously. But for most of you, fingers crossed, the way you will interact with the police is on the road, during traffic controls, through minor accidents, through breath testing after a big event. So in the past, the way in which most citizens interacted with the police was as part of being drivers in one way or the other. And with the automated car and the AI infrastructures of an integrated smart traffic system, that changes fundamentally. It was not possible to drive lawfully, I think. There was always a reason to stop you and say, your number plate isn't quite clean, or your wheels are a bit driven down, and then the police would at least know who you are and maybe have a look around in your car. In the US, under constitutional law, pretextual search, stop and search of cars has been okayed by the Supreme Court. With automated cars, this will not happen any longer. The AI will say, I can prove everything is okay, go away. So potentially an important source for police intelligence will disappear. An important source for citizen-to-police interaction in a reasonably friendly environment will disappear, but we will get other forms of intelligence and data gathering, because the car potentially also collects data about us. New forms of surveillance as a result of that. We might have a discussion if we move from physical vectors to virtual vectors. In online services, we already have the question, should we design them in such a way that the state gets access? We will also have this in automated cars, should they be remotely disabled. Related to that, who watches the watchers? Who controls the police? And the answer is increasingly we all. The proliferation of AI and big data not only works for the police, it also works in the other direction. The algorithms that predict if you are at risk of committing a crime can also be used to predict if a police officer is at risk of taking a bribe or having a mental breakdown because they deal too often with too traumatic things in their own best interest, or so it seems. So we look into the abyss, but the abyss stares back. And that is also true for the abyss that AI might provide for us. Do we want a police force that is permanently under scrutiny, permanently analyzed? We have one big discussion about workplace surveillance. We have another discussion about surveillance of citizens by the police. We haven't brought these yet together. But police officers are also employees, and therefore also subject to algorithmic control, prediction, and scrutiny. And very, very finally, I just about, I think, managed that in my 15 minutes. I promised you an anecdote of my life, didn't I? 21 years ago, in a very, very, very small way, I helped to write legal history. We had a state visit at this time in Munich by the Chinese Prime Minister, who wasn't particularly popular in certain circles, including my circles. And there are protests across all of Germany, sometimes violent protests, because some cities had prohibited these demonstrations. There were massive police-citizen violence in Hamburg, for instance. The Bavarians didn't. The Munich government said, oh, no, that's fine. You go demonstrating. That's perfectly fine. We help you. We help you coming there, and we have some traffic cops to put you in the right place. And what they did was very, very subtly directing us behind one of these big brass music bands. So the Chinese guests didn't really see us. They saw us behind the music. And as far as they knew, we were simply people cheering them on rather than going out of Tibet, which I think was the main event. And we were not happy. Amnesty, of which I was a member, we sued. And we argued that that was a violation of the right to demonstration, not because we were prevented from demonstrate, but because we were prevented to have the right type of symbolic value. They used traffic cops, traffic regulation, to prevent us from demonstrating effectively. And amazingly enough, I was really surprised. The court said, you are right. That was an intervention with your right to demonstrate. Now think about the smart city, controlled by algorithms, where decision-making is diffused, where you don't know any longer this was signed off by a senior police officer. They knew exactly what they were doing. We could demonstrate this. And this would, in a modern smart city environment, be hidden somewhere in the infrastructure, in the AI, that says, oh yeah, it seems like a good traffic control measure to redirect these demonstrators a bit, or to put the traffic light on a red wave, so unfortunately they don't arrive at the right point in time when the state person is there. So traffic policing has a massive connection to political power, to control over public spaces. This is not Robocop. This is not Minority Report. This is much more dangerous because it's not an individual piece of software that is used visibly to achieve a more or less problematic aim. It will become the automated decision-making in much, much larger, much, much more complex, much more difficult to scrutinize decision environments. And I think, as this example has shown from 21 years ago right to today, it remains as a political and ethical question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Schäfer. I think these examples will stick in our heads. Thank you very much, and now we know what we are about to see in the future. Okay, may I ask now Dr. Neppel for her presentation.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this conference, and I'm really impressed that institutions like the Patent Office, also where I am part of, can organize this kind of conferences, which proves that maybe we are not just a bureaucracy. To my presentations, I'm a computer scientist, and my specialty is computer-implemented inventions. Now, as you might know, one way to implement these is by software. And you might also know that the relationship between software and patents is not an easy one. So right from the beginning, I was involved in a number of projects or discussions on possible social implications of patents, such as patents and open source, patents and standards. But I must say that one of the most exciting projects I was in is one which was actually mentioned today, and this is the scenarios for the future, which we did 10 years ago. And at that time, we were looking and asked different stakeholders from government, from academia, from from industry. And we asked him to devise possible scenarios for the future of the IP. And we looked beyond the context of IP, and we were trying to look what would be the drivers of future developments. And some of the drivers you can see here. There were 4 scenarios which came up, one of them having technology as a dominant driver, the other having geopolitics, then society, and then business. And basically it was used as a test bed, or as you would like a wind tunnel to test policies. You can say now that after 10 years we can say would like to see which of these scenarios have come true. And I would say it depends. It depends, of course, on the context of your question. Now, coming to artificial intelligence and ethics, I think it also, of course, has a technology driver. It also has a societal driver and a business driver. Now, you would say, what is geopolitics? And I would just like to refer to I'm sure Kay will refer to this, on the initiative which is driven by IEEE on the embedding of ethical values into autonomous systems. And of course, I attended this workshop 2 weeks ago. And the question is, what kind of values should we embed? And I think there was a consensus that these values should be in conformity with human rights. But then again, it was a question, so what is human rights if we look into a political system? So that is already a question that you have to refer to. I would like now to see a little bit and what is actually driving now, what kind of consequences do we already see now in the patent systems as concerns artificial intelligence. Very often you see these kind of headlines, so robot files a patent. What if you look into the article, it refers basically that the process of filing a patent, filling out the forms, is done in an automatic way. And of course there is a consequence to that, because this kind of work was done by a complete department of a patent law firm, and now it is done just by one click. But it is still the automation of the patent processing as we know it until now. So of course we also have this automation in different other fields. It can be from, as I said, filing, also to examining. Maybe we will need to have less examiners in patent search and so on. We also see, we heard about today about generating inventions, but we also see these kind of developments generating prior art in an automatic way. Now, the reason for this is that, for instance, here, this kind of initiative wants to prevent patents on certain ideas. So, again, an automation of the process in the traditional way of processing patents. But what I would like to talk today about is to put the artificial intelligence in the center and see what if we have inventions based on artificial intelligence. And for that, I would like to go back a little bit to the basics of the patent system and see what is the basic principle. The basic principle is that there should be a benefit to the public and a benefit to the owner. The benefit to the public is that they get a detailed description of the invention after 18 months after the filing. And the benefit of the owner is that they can prevent third parties from exploiting that invention. So they get an exclusivity for a limited period of time, 20 years, in a given territory. So it could be seen as a contract between the society and the owner. You get the exclusivity, and in exchange, you have to reveal this invention to the public. Now, the rationale behind this, we are here about technological innovation and how to promote technology. The rationale behind is that the patent system in this way promotes technical innovation, because you have invented something that you will disclose, and then the public can find that technology, it can learn from it, and it can also build on it. And this, again, will generate new technological innovation. Now, I would like you to think, for instance, of new systems like the AlphaGo system. Maybe you have heard of it, which was trained in order to, and was very successful, to now be able to beat the best human Go player. Now, let's try to think, can we get a patent on AlphaGo? And let's go again, having this in mind of the patent system, what would we need here? So first of all, what do we need to disclose to the public? Well, first of all, we need to have an inventor. That's going to already be a problem. A detailed description of the invention, how it is constructed, how it is used, benefits compared with already existing technology, and the technical effect. And then you have the claim, with, as I said before, with a precise definition of what the patent protects, so that the public can see what the exclusivity is about and that it can build on it. Now, I think that as concerns AlphaGo, I already gave the answer to this question, because probably a technical effect will be difficult to derive from a system which will play Go. But of course, if we look to self-learning systems, we will have also systems which will have a technical effect. Now, only taking into, as an example, a system which was trained to distinguish different colors. Of course, you could have a technical effect for that. You can have a technical system which is used for diagnosis, which is used for traffic control. So certainly we will have artificial intelligence with technical effects. And now let's see what this means. What is then actually disclosed? What can we disclose with such a system? And again, I'm really talking about the artificial intelligence as such. I'm not talking about a technical system where you use artificial intelligence. Well, let's see, what can be the difference it makes? What can be the cause of the difference it makes as compared to previous technology? We heard about training data. So very often these systems are trained with data, and sometimes this data is biased. So if that's the only difference, as I said, is that, first of all, patentable? And then how would you claim something like that? Would it be part of the description? Is it realistic that once you train that system, it will be static for the next 20 years and it will rely on those data that it was trained on? I don't know. Is it the underlying algorithms? Of course, if you come up with a completely new algorithm, that could be possibly, a technical innovation. For the moment, most of these systems, however, are based on known algorithms, on neural network, on genetic algorithms, and so on. And we also see a lot of open source initiative there. But of course, if you come up with a new algorithm which nobody else thought of, maybe that could be patentable. Of course, there is also another thing which might be interesting for the public, namely the correlations and the causalities found. So what did the artificial intelligence learn? That would be interesting, of course. If I would knew that a certain combinations of inputs, like for instance environmental factors, would have a certain effect, that would be interesting. Maybe I can get a patent on it. Now, first of all, the question, is this a discovery or an invention? I will not go into that discussion. I would just say we already heard artificial intelligence is still a black box. So we still, from the technical point of view, we don't know what the artificial intelligence learned. We simply are not that far, but we are already employing this technology. So there are already initiatives which try to open the black box of the AI to understand what it learned, but we are simply just not there. So again, coming back to the patent system, what about these self-learning systems, which realistically, of course, are not static? They are dynamic. So that means that the behavior and possibly also the technical effect is changing. Now, for instance, if my color detection system is used in a system for sorting out tomatoes, and it is very good in learning the red color, but then you might maybe use the tomatoes which are green also for salads. It might mean that maybe green is a good red. Is a red good enough, you know? So it can change. And again, if we come back to this social contract, which says we have to reveal the invention to the public in order to get the exclusivity, if we apply that to self-learning system for undisclosed technical effect, or even effects that will materialize in the future, how is this invention revealed to the public? So this is just a question. It's a personal opinion. I wanted to say I'm not representing the official opinion of the Patent Office. It's just a question that I have. And I was asking myself, so does the societal contract still apply? So do we still have this vicious circle of technological innovation where the public can find that the information of what was invented, to learn from it, and to build on it? Now, this being said, you might say patents are not at all applicable to autonomous systems or artificial intelligence. I would like to stress that, of course, that if you design a completely new technology and completely new architecture using artificial intelligence, that could be patentable. But from a more societal point of view, I would also like to say and to point to the advantage of the patent system, namely that it discloses something. So if you want to get protection, you have to disclose what you're doing. So if you are looking to the alternatives, we already heard the alternatives would be to keep it secret. And that would also not be good, especially if we talk about ethics and what values are and biases which might be underlying the autonomous systems. So in my view, in the future, we will have to devise a mix of IP, legal, and other forms in order to keep both the technological innovation, the incentive for technological innovation, and transparency. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neppel. You have really triggered my fantasy. First, I asked myself the question, how do I look in a black box? The answer is with my intuition, if I had one, or if I could trust it. That's the one part. And the other fantasy is, do we need patents in the future? Take this with you to your home. And now I'm very happy to give the floor to who's starting? To Dr. Balz.
So actually what you are going to see now from us is a duet of Kay and myself. So we have a presentation in common. It's not about dancing. I must say it's really a great conference and the organizers have done a great job, but at the same time, no conference organizer has been so successful in making me so nervous before giving a talk, because until the very last moment, I was not so sure about what is my task going to be when I get on this stage. And especially when we started with this dancing, I thought, oh God, and I don't know whether you want to listen to me when I talk about legal things, but definitely you wouldn't want to see me dancing. So I focus on, on the legal issues. And indeed, at these days, I think there's not many things that are so important to talk about from a legal perspective as well, as is the case in relation to artificial intelligence and ethics. And it's really also from my perspective, as I start belonging to the elder part of society already, unfortunately, but it's very good to see that there are so many young people who are concerned about ethics in the new society, who are taking care. So this is really great and relieving. And we have heard a lot about an intense debate about what kind of values should be implemented, what values are relevant in the new AI-driven society. But what from our perspective deserves a little more attention eventually is the more practical question, how can we indeed make sure that all these important ethical values are indeed implemented into AI-driven applications. And that is actually what we want to focus upon. I really think that in this regard, we are living at the crossroads of history. The decisions that we are going to take today will significantly impact and shape tomorrow's society, and that is probably even more true for the decisions that we do not take. And therefore, what the mission of our presentation now is to present like a toolkit of regulatory approaches that you can rely upon, that you can refer to in order to implement ethics into artificial intelligence technologies. Presentation in two parts. I'm going to start with a brief presentation that's honestly and frankly speaking the more dry part. I want to explain which kind of regulatory tools you could refer to in order to make ethical values binding. And the more creative part is then up to Kay, who is going to present the details, and it has been mentioned already, of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems. In my part of this presentation, the core message that I would like to bring across is that there is, in the end, no such thing like a uniform regulatory approach to address all the ethical concerns that we are talking about and you may be concerned about. The reasons in this regard are twofold. At first, ethical values in themselves are extremely multifaceted and are extremely heterogeneous. And at second, any kind of AI application has a different or may have a different risk scenario. So before we start thinking about regulating artificial intelligence, regulating ethics and asking ourselves how to implement ethics, we really need to look at the overall picture, the complete picture of pros and cons of a specific AI application. And to make this a little more concrete, I would like to refer to the example of the healthcare sector. In this regard, surgery robots and telemedicine applications are amongst those AI applications which are quite likely to be used increasingly even in the near future. I have now in this regard tried to summarize a list of the major advantages and risks that are associated with the use of artificial intelligence in the field of healthcare. The purpose of my talk is now not to walk you through all of these risks, because certainly all of these can be heavily debated. This is just something that crossed my mind when I started thinking about that issue. All this is really up to debate. But what I would like to underline by referring to this complex table of pros and cons is to show you that also these problems that may be associated to a specific field of application of artificial intelligence is extremely heterogeneous and multifaceted. And therefore, if we start thinking about regulating artificial intelligence, we have to bear in mind that there is no single uniform legal approach, but that we need a mix of tools, a mix of legal and also technical measures in order to get things right and regulate eventually then potential risks related to artificial intelligence. Now turning to the legal side of things, I've mentioned that before regulating ethical concerns related to a certain AI application, you have to look at the specific risk scenario of an AI application. In addition to that, if you remember, I mentioned that each ethical concern in itself may be very heterogeneous and may be judged differently depending on whom you ask. So the second thing you have to bear in mind is what kind of ethical value is it that you want to protect? And what I've tried to do is to set up something like a hierarchy of ethical values and to show you how these different levels of ethical values could be addressed by regulators. We have a whole toolkit of different legal means in this regard, and it is important from my perspective to underline in this respect that it's not only just about legislation. Certainly legislation is an important means to regulate certain risks, but it's not the only thing what we could do to handle and tackle specific risks. In addition to that, there is legislation on national levels, on international levels. We have the possibility to regulate specific ethical rules also in bilateral investment treaties. We could refer to a more self-regulation driven approach like standardization and case addressing this issue later on in very much detail. And one further issue of self-regulation that I would like to refer to and which I think could play a vital role in regulating ethical concerns is certification. And I will come up with an example in this regard shortly. Other regulatory tools are, just to mention those completely, contracts and certainly also, I think Mr. Leinen mentioned that yesterday already, like guidelines and other non-binding rules, so-called soft law. Whether and which kind of regulation we need then has to be decided on the basis of a complex evaluation of all risks and of the nature of each of these ethical concerns. I would in this regard again like to refer back to my example of an AI application in the field of healthcare, specifically looking now at a telemedicine machine that takes care of a patient at home. This certainly has a huge benefit. It reduces hospital stays and thereby limits down further the risks of secondary infections, which is a huge issue these days. But at the same time, we do not know how this reduced interpersonal contacts between humans impacts on our lives. We simply do not know what will the consequences be of these reduced interpersonal human contacts on the one side and the increase of human-machine interaction on the other side. This may raise a huge issue from a human dignity perspective, because we simply do not know what are the impacts on the human psyche and on the human self-concept. All this is questions that we need to address and that we need to answer. If an evaluation in that regard should come to the conclusion that indeed human dignity is at risk as a consequence of that non-personal treatment method, I think we might need something like universally valid and binding rules, which could ideally be incorporated by national or international legislation. So maybe legislation would be the right way to go forward in order to address these fundamental ethical issues. Legislation would also be probably the right tool from our regulatory toolbox if we think about ethical principles that are enshrined in fundamental rights such as privacy or private autonomy protection. A practical example in that regard, if you think again about my telemedicine machine, what happens if the patient suffers from a stroke at home? Should the telemedicine machine immediately call for medical help? I think everybody would immediately answer, yes, it should. A robot should be in line with the Asimov laws, should be construed in a way to save people's lives. But would that also be the ethically correct answer if this patient has declared in an advance directive that he does not want to receive medical care in case a specific emergency or in case he risks, in case of a specific emergency, to become something like a case of nursing care? So would that, what you can see from this example, that we have two conflicting ethical principles in the end. We have on the one side the patient's private autonomy that is protected on the constitutional fundamental rights basis, and on the other side we have the right to human life, which needs to be protected. And this balancing decision is ideally, from my perspective, done by legislators in the course of a public, transparent, democratic process. Legislation, however, is obviously, I think, not the right toolkit if it comes to the protection of group-specific ethical values. And again, I would like to turn to my example of the telemedicine machine. If you imagine that this machine can also order food for the patient, and if you are a Jewish patient, then obviously you want your food only to be kosher. So what kind of robot do you buy in that regard? This is an obvious question from a Jewish perspective, but we do not need, obviously, a law to provide for a mandatory binding provision that telemedicine machines are only allowed to order kosher food. This is something that would be ideal to be tackled by certification. Certification also would be a right regulatory approach if it comes to more individual ethical values. In that regard, not only certification could be referred to, but that could also be regulated on a mere bilateral contractual basis. Irrespective now of these different regulatory tools, what can play a vital role on each level is technical standardization. And this is indeed a very new way how to indeed implement ethical values directly into AI applications. And in that regard, I would like to leave the floor to Kay, and she's now presenting about the IEEE initiative. Thank you very much.
So probably the right music for me would be the William Tell Overture, because we are going to gallop through the standardization process. I am Vice Chair of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems. It is probably the longest title in the entire world. If anyone can come up with a shorter title, please see me afterwards. I'm going to call it the IEEE Global Initiative. But what are we actually tackling? Well, just today, you've heard about fake news, policing with AI, lethal autonomous weapons. Those are weapons that make their own choices about targeting and shooting. We've heard about self-learning computers. Computers that now, for example, can play poker better than we can and can bluff us poor humans in order to beat us. We haven't heard about the social impacts, but it's estimated that within the next 8 years, somewhere between 16 and 52% of the jobs that we now do will have disappeared to AI automation. Obviously, there'll be new jobs, but the conversation then becomes around universal basic income. What we are doing here is we are not recreating the human brain, but we are seeking to automate some of the processes that hitherto, as humans, we had the key to. So, how do we consider all of these things in an ethical way which allows the innovations, the benefits of AI innovations to come forward, and some of the problems of AI innovation to be dealt with? And so that's what we're doing at the IEEE Global Initiative, or we're trying to. So we were created because there was this, in some ways, an uncritical view of AI, and in other ways, a great fear. And you'll remember all the articles about AI often come with pictures of the Terminator on them. And so we at the IEEE wanted to have a proper discourse around this. I should possibly just tell you a little bit about what the IEEE is. The IEEE is a group of engineers, and they work around the world. There are about 400,000 of us, but you don't have to be an engineer to be a member of the IEEE. I'm a lawyer by background, and I'll talk a little bit more about how all of you can join this initiative should you be interested in doing so. We started in December 2015, where there were only 12 of us. By our public launch in April 2016, there were about 40 of us. Today, there are about 240 experts, from interdisciplinary experts thinking about the ethical considerations of AI and AS. So our mission is to ensure that every technologist is educated, trained, and empowered to prioritize ethical considerations in the design and development of AI and AS systems, and those ethical considerations are aligned to human rights and well-being. And I can talk more about that later, but not in this talk, if you ask me questions. We have 2 deliverables. One is to produce this document each year. So if you are looking for a place to start thinking about AI and ethics, this is the document to go to. It was produced in December of 2016, when we just had 8 committees working on these issues. It will be produced again in November of 2017. We now have 13 committees working on these issues. And to give you an idea of the scope of the work, our committees are mixed reality, that's AR and VR, policy, general principles, well-being, embedding values into AI and AS, methodologies to guide ethical research and design in these areas, of AI, personal data and individual access control, economics and humanitarian, law, effective computing, that's you putting emotions into artificial intelligence, classical ethics in ICT, and lethal autonomous weapons systems. Now, I'm often asked, well, how can you pick one ethical system? And that's true, we can't. As I say, the IEEE works with people from around the world, and this particular document has now been translated into Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. We've also had conferences around the world, including in India and Brazil, as well as Europe and the States. Our other deliverable is the standards, and we're very proud that out of those committees, so far, and we've only been going about a year, has come 11 proposed standards. So what is a standard and why standards? Well, standards have the benefit of creating a conversation around these things. An IEEE standard takes between 2 and 4 years to actually become a standard. And during the time that we are debating the standard, we are iterating it. We're being cognizant of what's happening, and we're thinking about making the right standard. And then, of course, standards create certainty, and certainty in innovation is actually quite useful. As we found in pharma, it means you don't spend money looking at looking at things that you can't actually work in. So it also provides, the standards also provide a backstop for engineers who are being asked perhaps to do work in AI that they don't feel comfortable working in. So there are a lot of standards there, and I just wanted to talk about P7001 very quickly. And that's the transparency of autonomous systems, the black box systems. So we're told all the time, well, these systems are so complex that we humans can't understand them. And Oren Etzioni of the Paul Allen Institute on AI recently produced an article in which he said, because humans cannot understand AI, then what we need is guardian AI. So if you think about it, his suggestion is that in an autonomous vehicle, the autonomous vehicle will have a standard AI, and that will do the driving. But because they're self-learning, the algorithm might notice that these naughty human beings get around quicker by speeding or running the red light, And so therefore the Guardian algorithm would sit in the car and make sure that the standard algorithm didn't do anything naughty. So we instead have this standard P7001, where we say, actually, if we're going to produce these systems, we should, as human beings, at least be able to understand them, because we need to. We heard about talking about trust earlier on. The wider society needs to be able to trust. As a lawyer, if there's an accident with a robot, I need to be able to cross-examine the algorithm, or at least have some understanding of what the algorithm did at the time of the accident. Accident investigators likewise. Axel talked about certification. How can we certify if we don't know what we're certifying? So this standard aims to develop a standard that sets out measurable and testable levels of transparency in each of those stakeholder categories. Therefore, autonomous systems can be objectively assessed and levels of compliance determined. And our second point on that is that we want to articulate levels of transparency in a range that defines the minimum level up to the highest achievable standard of acceptance. That standard will provide designers of autonomous systems and artificial intelligence with a toolkit by which they can self-assess transparency, and also with recommendations for how to address the shortcomings, or what we call transparency hazards. So I said I'd come back to how you can get involved. The IEEE accepts both the initiative and the working groups on these standards, accepts anybody with some expertise and background in this area. Particularly, we want to encourage all the youth in the audience to join these, because this is your future. I'll be dead and gone probably before most of this happens, but this is your future. So if you want to be involved, both Axel and I would be very happy to hear from you. Either email us or catch us afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Butterfield. You gave me some ideas now how to put emotions into AI systems. I think this is really exciting. And I just identified a new profession coming from an audit company. It's called the AI auditors. Okay, if you are looking for a new concept, here's an opportunity. Thank you very much. And now may I ask Mr. How do you call it? Sridhar DP. Thank you very much.
So, difficult part of the session, right? I'm sure you're all looking at your watches. Yeah? Right. Thank you, WFEB, for having me here. I shuttle between Bangalore and the Bay Area. Not even a single day goes, without people talking about AI, ML, DL, right, whatnot. Well, apart from Trump winning the elections recently, there was a referendum in California. What was that about? As part of the election, anybody? About making marijuana legal. Did you track that story? No? Okay. Okay, here's a pitch that I heard recently from a bunch of Stanford students who came to me and said, Shri, if you ever feel low, I said, They said they would ask me to meditate. They said, no, if you ever feel low, we would know about it. I said, what? They said, you have a wearable and we track all your information. And I said, what do you do? I said, we would have parked a drone in SFO or LA Beach, and what does it do? It delivers a pack of marijuana to your home. Right? So this is innovation, but is this really ethical? Right? So that's a kind of cutting edge that people are talking about, but is that really ethical? So with that, I would, are we up? Need some help? Yeah. How many of you heard about this? I know we have 10 minutes to lunch, so I'll keep it interactive. Did you know about Ellie? Yeah, yes, some of you, right? Even before she learned to walk, she climbed the wall. Well, thanks to her mother, Rachel. She was climbing, it seems, when she was carrying. I'm sure all of you are talking about the new human consciousness. How many of you know about the indigo kids, the crystal kids, the rainbow kids? So it's not just the machine consciousness, there is also an evolution in human consciousness. And I'm sure you've seen him. Who is this? Elon Musk, right? What did he do recently? What's a buzz? Tesla is an old issue. What's a new thing? What did he say? He said, I want to keep my mind off, right? He said, I want to plant some device to my mind, right? That's what he talked about. The new project is called Neuralink. So, well, that's the Ellie to Elon, right? So that's how the shift is happening from human to machine consciousness, right? So that's where we are today. Well, as a group, let's say, here is the dilemma. Is this a technology takeover or a mass makeover? Right? So technology takeover could be soulless, it could be rootless, it could have a very narrow purpose. Whereas we are interested in a mass makeover which has that real empathy with the humans, right? So it has to be inclusive, it has to be holistic. So how do we really make this happen? So here's what I thought. I said, well, it's not just artificial intelligence, it has to have artificial intelligence. Yeah? You like that? Thank you. Right. So let's put the heart there. And my definition for that is, let's take this cutting edge technology to the people who need it the most at the cutting edge. Big ticket problems are confronted through collaborative efforts. And we need solutions for the grand and global problems, right? So that's where we want our AI to be useful. Well, I like the painter who painted this beautiful picture. I said, how do we sow intelligent seeds for reaping collective good? That's what I want to talk about. Well, why did I take agriculture? My father used to be an advisor for farmers. He worked in the government department, and post-retirement, he said, I want to be a farmer. And I come from the Bay Area, I talk about technology, he talks about productivity. I talk about IoT, he talks about human values. We are already, having this contradiction. But then I said, let me investigate. So here are some real problems that we have in the emerging markets. So most of the farmers in the emerging markets live on the mercy of middlemen, informal credit, poor enabling infrastructure, and well, adverse quality of life. But then, this is not just the problem of India. Remember, by 2050, we have how many mouths to feed? Any guess? 9.7 billion mouths to be fed by 2050. Unless until you and I address this, right, nobody is going to solve this for us. So, what's happening in this ecosystem? Let's look at all the stakeholders here in the agriculture. So you have the consumer, you have the government, right? They do a lot of support. Let's not miss the earth and environment from a sustainability point, the farmer, the real producer, and the market, right? So I thought I'll bring up some issues. Consumers, you and me want the good produce, right? At a quality price, at an affordable price. So that's a input that we want. And if you look at market, there are too many intermediaries. The producer is not getting the right price. There are a lot of regulation issues. So how do we address this? Government, they're the biggest spender, right? India, you lose elections on onions, right? So there's a documented history. So, well, how do we ensure food and nutritional security and subsidy? One of the topics that we had was about economics. Government spends a lot of money on subsidies. Well, is that fair? Is that the right thing to be doing? Well, in the West, you look at it as a sunrise sector. So, is that fair? So, that's the question that we're asking. Also, on the other side, if you look at earth and environment, this is what we have done. Soil degradation, pollution, soil erosion, groundwater contamination. We have made our lives miserable, isn't it? So, here are a bunch of contradictions and conflicts that I want to leave you with. On one side, we are talking about automation. There is a surplus labor availability in a country like India. You have increased our mass production that we are getting into, but then that could lead to a lot of environment sustainability issues. So how do we really balance this contradictions and conflicts? Well, we have some resource. I think this is the right audience to talk about it. I'll spend some time on this. Let's say, close your eyes and say, what is it that each one of these stakeholders would need? I would call this as an ideal final result. Now that sounds very technical. Think of a dream solution. For a consumer, what do you want? You want a quality of produce, isn't it? I want the best of food to be available. I want the right nutrition. If you look at the government, we want to be a welfare state, right? Look at earth and environment, sustainability. It's saying, don't forget me, right? Market, well, they want profit maximization. And the producer is saying, I want good quality of life. I don't want to just live with the subsidies, right? I want a good quality of life. Now, on one side, we are talking about contradictions. On the other side, we are talking about dream solutions. Is there a path forward? Can we do something? Well, I see a lot of young crowd here. Not that I'm any old. So I thought, let me give you some solutions. Well, who said innovation is 99% perspiration, 1% invention? Who said that? No. Edison said that. Thank you. Right? On the other side of the world, you had somebody who said, you don't have to perspirate to innovate. A Russian said this. Any guess? 1950s. No? A scientist called Altshuler, who got his first patent at the age of 12, he was having his opinion against the government, and you remember what was happening those days, right? So he was packed into a jail. So those 3 years were very, very fruitful years for him. How many patent documents did he read? He read 200,000 patent abstracts and 40,000 highly inventive solutions. He read all of them, and he came out with some interesting statistics. He said 77% of the inventions that we see today, they're all about what you know, what your industry knows. He called it as level 1 and level 2. Level 3, he said, what do you borrow from another industry? He spoke about analogy thinking. He said, can I borrow something from biomedics to nutrition? So that's level 3. Look at that number, just 18%. Can there be a new technology? Can that be a great leveler? Only 4% of the patents in this space. And the guard particle, I'm sure you heard about guard particle very recently, right? Well, you just have 2% of patents in those space. So, AI and IoT, they're all in the realm of level 3 and level 4 innovations. So, we have to elevate the way we ideate. We have to elevate the way we are going to innovate, right? So, you already have some direction in that space. Well, where do you look for more information? TRIS, Theory of Inventive Problem Solving. Germany has an active group, so it's called e-TRIS, European TRIS. So I think you should just go subscribe there, right? So, well, this is how it all started. Now, this is level 1, right? 1900s. That's what people used to write the charcoal. So level 2, same solution, but now you have a pencil. Level 3, a new form of solution. The ink came up. Level 4, we had printer to do that. And level 5, we had a stylus do this. Today, that is the new normal, right? That's level 1. Anybody want to ideate with me? What could be level 2? Let's say we have moved in the time horizon, right? So we are already here. We are already in the cutting edge. What could be level 2? 3D printing. What could be level 3? We are upping the bar. What could be level 4? You see that? I think it happens. Possible? I think it happens. We spoke about telepathy, right? I thought of you is what you say. I think it happens. That's the space that we are getting into as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, right? So there are systematic ways to go there and do things. So here are a bunch of solutions that I have kind of worked with. How about having a self-care agri-net precision farming? I'm sure most of you have heard of it, with a combination of AI and IoT. Intelligent crop management solution, integration with the market. Auto farming, right? So tractors knows where to plow. Soil moisture using IoT. A company called John Deere did that. We have Mahindras in India who are very actively doing that. And storage is a big concern for a country like us, so smart storage solutions. So how do we integrate all these things together, right? I know it's not really a grand solution, but I'm just seeding some thoughts. Well, time for lunch. Do we have pizzas today? Yeah. Well, this is what I want to tell you. The country that gave us pizza, pastas, they seem to have the best health index. How do they do that, right? So 93%. So if you look at that rating, they stand there 90 to 94%. Well, can my machine learn something about this? Can it go tap into that race which are immune to cardiovascular disease, which are immune to diabetics, and then talk to other nodes, maybe to the nutrition nodes, to the climate node, and tell me the right way to do the sowing, tell me the right nutrition, and that definitely talks to economy. You see a smiley there, that's a value node, right? So all this has to be done in confirmation with the values. So I see artificial intelligence as an intelligent nodes talking to each other, right, to solve grand and global problems. Here are a few prescriptions that I want to leave you with. Well, as a government, so can we be more open, support critical projects? I'm sure some of the governments are doing it. UN is doing it. As corporates, well, Google did the deep learning. Can they make it open? Can they share it for collective good? So from a corporate perspective, from not-for-profit, well, we are all, I see this in the Silicon Valley, people crying about doomsday, but then can we constructively criticize and help technologies to evolve, to build a better world? And as citizens, can we actively involve, right? So I want to leave with this parting slide. I know this is the first conference on innovation for ethics. Let's take a call and say, do we want to make AI a walled garden or an open public park? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sridhar. You are opening up our mind. And my summary for this is quantum leaps.
Thank you.
And you're pointing us to ourselves.
Sure.
That it's really up to us to open the mind and to really take control in the opposite, not really control, but to take the initiative.
That's right.
Because it's, in the end, it's our spirit.
That's right.
And we've been provided with an update to our systems, the brain,
yeah,
with the new children, which most of us have. Right. So this for the perspective. We're a little bit over time, but I still would like to have 3 questions if Mr. Glaser would allow me, and if you are not so hungry that you need to stream out right away. So yes, please. Do you have a microphone?
Very grateful for all this presentation because I'm a bit outside of AA, so I was very fascinated by this issue. But I'm a bit concerned by the potential loss of human value. I mean, for all my life, I've been working on the issue of diversity advantage, so how to manage diversity, not only in workplaces, mainly in workplaces, but also in city management. So, for example, I'm involved in a network of the Council of Europe coordinating more than 100 cities. that decide to strongly invest on the issue of diversity. So it's a cross-cutting topic in all their policies. So my question is, if these cities took the path of being more smart cities, there would be a place for the diversity advantage issue. I mean, the diversity advantage is compatible with smart cities controlled by algorithms, or do we have to expect that also the diversity advantage will be somehow automatized in the future? Thanks.
So, to whom is the question? Okay.
All right, quite a lot of things in there. Firstly, there is a big dimension of diversity also in, I think, the AI and engineering field, which is not adequately addressed. I think it's slightly worrying that digital assistants, AIs that work as secretaries, are called Siri and Tay and come with ostensibly female avatars, and as soon as it becomes a serious legal advisor, it's called Ross and looks extremely male. You find the same in robotics if you look at the type of ethnicities that are represented, the types of genders that are represented. So the issue of diversity doesn't go away just because we replace humans by robots or by AIs. We find some of these old patterns replicated there again. Regarding the benefits of diversity, well, there's this one fear that big data becomes a leveler in a not good way, that it becomes all standardized, that it removes this element of human individuality and also of group individuality, which is a problem. I'm, however, also a little bit worried that, and I think that comes naturally to ethicists and even more so for lawyers, that we tend to look at the things that concern us rather than necessarily at the things that are good about it. And just to counteract some of the impressions I might have given in my talk, I think there's also the opposite going on. And that's why I think interacting with, for instance, religious groups can be really, really helpful, because we also need, I think, an ethics of humility when we are dealing with AIs. That I sometimes recognize, as intelligent as I am and as much as the taxpayer invested in training me to the highest level, I have a relatively limited set of experiences, a very specific set of experience. And, white middle-class male, I mean, how much life have I experienced? AIs potentially have experienced much, much more. They can, as legal AIs, draw on many, many more cases than a human expert will ever be able to, in a medical context as well. And I think especially highly trained professionals will have to acquire that degree of humility, that they say, well, actually, you do know more than I am. You have experienced more. You have experienced more fragments and aspects of humanity than I, in one lifetime, ever could. They are, in a way, accumulations of many, many different lifetimes. And I think that is another ethical dimension, that we really recognize there are sometimes good ethical reasons to defer judgments to machines. Okay, and that we have to recognize where our limits are. And one of these is the issue of diversity, that we will always have a very limited, pre-selected range of experiences, and AIs do not necessarily have to have them if we design them correctly.
Okay, thank you very much. Second question, please. To whom, please? To whom the question?
To Professor Schäfer. But yeah, I will start with the presentation of Dr. Walz. So he presented us how it's possible to implement ethics in the
session. We are so pleased that you're here and that you are chairing the session, and we would leave it to you to introduce your speakers. Thank you.